The link between disability, poverty, and poor health outcomes is well documented. Yet, governments often view and talk about supports for disabled people in terms of providing charity rather than upholding rights. The UN Committee on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities recently called out Canada for failing to ensure that all disability entitlements, including those stemming from the Canada Disability Benefit Act, support an adequate standard of living and alleviate poverty for persons with disabilities, and for failing to streamline access to benefits across jurisdictions. In this health ethics seminar, I will provide an overview of the charity model and the rights model for providing supports to disabled people. Included in this overview will be a snapshot of the current prevalence of poverty among disabled Canadians and disabled Albertans. I will then use a disability ethics lens to examine the ethical implications of two recent policy decisions by the Alberta government, namely the decision to claw back the new Federal Canadian Disability Benefit, CDB, from assured income for the severely handicapped, ASH, recipients as income, and the decision to create a new Alberta Disability Assistance Program, ADAP, ostensibly to address concerns that the current ASH program disincentivizes employment. I will consider the claim made by many disability rights advocates that, just as with the clawback of the CDB, the real purpose of ADAP is to generate savings for the Alberta government at the expense of support for disabled Albertans. I will conclude the presentation by offering some best practices for what the ethical design and delivery of financial and health benefit disability support programs and policies could look like. I think it's important to contextualize this examination of charity versus rights-based approaches to disability supports, and specifically financial support for disabled people, by providing a brief overview of the financial situation of disabled Canadians and Albertans. As I do so, I must acknowledge an oft-repeated caution that to thus link disability with poverty is to risk perpetuating the age-old stereotype of disabled people as either utterly helpless and in need of the care of non-disabled people, or as indigent drains on society. In response to this caution, I would simply point to the reality that systemic ableism remains alive and well in Canada, and, as long as this remains the case, it is necessary to engage with the reality that disabled people in Canada are disproportionately impacted by poverty. According to a report by the advocacy organization, Disability Without Poverty, 16.8% of disabled Canadians aged 15 years or older, which equates to 1,521,000 people, were living in poverty in 2022. This means that 1 in 6 people with disabilities were living with the harsh effects of not having enough income to meet their daily basic needs. This graph shows the national rate of poverty for people with disabilities and people without disabilities from 2013 to 2022. The rate for people with disabilities was on average 2 times higher than the rate for people without disabilities living in poverty. The highest rate of poverty in this time frame was in 2015 when nearly 1/4, 23.2%, of people with disabilities lived in poverty. The lowest rate of poverty was in 2020, 14.7%. The rate reduction was largely a result of the federal pandemic income benefits, such as the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, CRB, and one-time top-ups to programs including the Disability Tax Credit, DTC, and the Canada Child Benefit, CCB. But these benefits still left more than 1.3 million people with disabilities in poverty in 2020. Earned income requirements, clawbacks for those on provincial and territorial income assistance programs, and the exclusionary and regressive nature of the disability tax credit meant that these and other barriers compounded to exclude many, particularly those in deep poverty, from benefiting. Since 2020, poverty rates for people with disabilities have been trending upwards, as they have for the general population. In Canada, the low-income cutoffs, LICOs, are used to determine the poverty line for individuals and families. For a single person in 2025, the LICO is $29,380. For a family of two, the LICO is $36,576. The LICOs are adjusted based on the size of the household and the region of Canada. This chart shows disability assistance amounts for each province and territory in 2022. Of note is the fact that, thanks to the de-indexation of AISH, the maximum monthly amount of Alberta's disability benefit is currently $1,901, for a total annual income of $22,812. This is well below the current low-income cutoff of $29,380 for a single person. Keeping this current context in mind, I would now like to consider the charity model of disability and disability supports. The charity model is arguably the oldest and most enduring mode of delivering supports for disabled people. Injunctions to give relief to the poor through sharing one's resources can be found in Jewish and Christian scriptures. Atkins delineates the history of the charity model in the Western world as follows, quote, "In 1349 in the UK, the Ordinance of Labours made it illegal to give alms to anyone capable of working. Charity was for the cripples who could not work. And in 1388, English law first distinguished between infirm and able-bodied beggars, initiating the tradition of treating the worthy and unworthy poor differently. This distinction has been passed down through the ages and can still be found in the regulation of disability benefits today, which often require income surveillance. In most jurisdictions, poverty invariably remains tied to any disability assistance. Consequently, most disabled persons are systematically excluded from regular economic and social life by a demand that they qualify for pensions on the basis of impairments and indigency. Disabled persons must remain outside the socio-economic fabric of the community." End quote. Atkins emphasizes the sharp distinction made in 14th century British law between the worthy poor, who are deserving of charity, and the unworthy poor, who are not, pointing out that, this distinction has been passed down through the ages and can still be found in the regulation of disability benefits today, which often require income surveillance. Indeed, this impetus to distinguish the worthy from the unworthy remains one of the most problematic characteristics of the charity model. Another primary, and problematic, characteristic of the charity model is that it is based on a power differential between the one who provides charity and the one who receives it. Smith Carrier observes that, quote, "Notwithstanding the long-standing tradition of charity in history, across time, space and culture, the power relations underlying the charitable model remain constant. It bifurcates those with means, and thus power, from those without. The provision of charity, although arguably well-intentioned, is always a transaction fueled by an unequal power differential, with the giver, benefactor, bestower, contributor, grantor, savior, on one side, and receiver, recipient, beneficiary, taker, subject, on the other. These asymmetrical power relations concomitantly strip those needing assistance of their dignity, while rewarding those in the position to give, for example with tax privileges, volunteer appreciation gestures and the sanguine do-good feeling. The helper leaves the helping transaction applauding themselves for their altruistic good deeds or benevolently unaware that those seeking assistance often leave the transaction ensconced in feelings of shame, indignity and unworthiness. Those deemed less fortunate are cast as unlucky victims of poor circumstances, or worse yet, as the architects and instigators of their own poverty. At the same time, the neoliberal structures and social relations that engender poverty are obscured from view. Policies and processes that bolster unemployment and work precarity, widen income inequality, reinforce racism and discrimination, and perpetuate assistance programs that rather than tackle poverty, reproduce it. End quote. Smith Carrier clearly articulates the problematic nature of the power differential at the heart of the charity model. While the giver, benefactor, bestower, contributor, grantor, savior, is recognized and rewarded by society for their beneficence, the receiver, recipient, beneficiary, taker, subject, is stripped of their agency and dignity, resulting in shame. This power differential inherent in the charity model thus results in the otherness of the recipient being reinforced and amplified, while the giver is lauded as a model citizen. It is both interesting and telling that, while Smith Carrier highlights the fact that the charity model reinforces racism and discrimination, she does not identify ableism as a specific form of discrimination which the charity model perpetuates. In contrast, I would argue that the charity model is particularly prone to both fostering and reinforcing ableism. Fundamentally, the charity model views disability as a tragedy and therefore individuals with disabilities are cast as objects of pity whose only instrumental value is as a means for the non-disabled to become better people. It is based on patronizing assumptions that perpetuate dependence, rather than a focus on fostering the development and flourishing of disabled people. The charity model is a derivative of the medical model of disability, which emphasizes deficits and presents disability as something to be diagnosed and cured through treatment from the medical community to regain wholeness or alleviated through charitable services by organizations or individuals. As DeWine explains, quote, "The charity model sees people with disabilities as victims of their impairment. Their situation is tragic, and they are suffering. Able-bodied people should therefore assist people with disabilities in whatever way possible, as they need special services, special institutions, etc., because they are different." End quote. Seal observes that quote, "Many people in the disability community regard the charity model in a very negative light. The model is often seen as depicting people with disabilities as helpless, depressed and dependent on other people for care and protection, contributing to the preservation of harmful stereotypes and misconceptions about people with disabilities." End quote. Indeed, it can legitimately be argued that the charity model, as it is most commonly conceptualized and enacted, is inherently ableist as it undermines the human dignity, not to mention the human rights, of disabled people as merely the objects of non-disabled people's benevolence. Because of the various ways in which the charity model of disability and disability supports are rooted in ableism, the perils of governments adopting the charity model as their underlying philosophy for providing disability supports are legion. Among the most fundamental and significant of these perils is the fact that, by basing the creation and delivery of financial and other disability-related supports on the charity model, governments can actively undermine the citizenship, and sometimes even the humanity, of their disabled constituents who require those supports. This occurs as governments repeatedly emphasize the vulnerability of disabled support recipients in order to cast the supports that their government has put in place as generous. The problem with governments casting disabled citizens as vulnerable in this manner is that it conveys the notion that vulnerability is a necessary consequence of disability, without acknowledging the fact that it is often systemic ableism, rather than disabilities in and of themselves, that renders disabled people vulnerable. This results in the further othering of disabled people in terms of governments casting them as the vulnerable, a group that is distinct from, and thus, separate from, their fellow citizens. Ultimately, this leads to the reinforcement of ableist stereotypes, and the further marginalization of disabled people as less than full citizens and even less than fully human. Related to the danger that adopting the charity model of disability and disability supports causes the citizenship, and sometimes even the humanity, of disabled people to be undermined is the risk that the disabled people receiving supports based on the charity model will internalize the ableist attitude that they are not a citizen of equal standing with their non-disabled peers. Internalized ableism can be defined as the process by which a disabled person absorbs the ableist attitudes that non-disabled people have repeatedly exhibited towards them, and begins to believe that their disabilities actually do make them inferior to non-disabled people. Disabled people who have internalized ableism will often experience shame regarding their identity and abilities, which may lead to attempts to conceal or minimize their disability in an effort to pass as normal. Similarly, disabled people who have internalized ableism will often avoid associating with other disabled people, especially in public, for fear of being stigmatized as one of those people. This can lead to feelings of isolation, and even alienation from oneself. Consequently, disabled people who thus internalize the ableism inherent in the charity model are at a heightened risk of developing serious mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, and even suicidality. These sorts of mental health issues can pose an even greater risk to disabled people now than they did in the past. This is because mental health conditions, such as anxiety, depression, and suicidality, which would have, until very recently, been viewed as pathologies in need of treatment, have now, with the advent of MAID, been transformed into rational responses to the suffering that is necessarily inherent to having disability. MAID is thus quickly becoming first-line treatment for these mental health conditions, if and when they are experienced by disabled people. Having looked at the main characteristics and pitfalls inherent in the charity model of disability supports, I will now turn to an examination of the rights-based model of disability supports. Many historians suggest that human rights is a concept which reaches back millennia. Concern for inequality and socio-economic deprivation appears in the Bible and other antique expressions of human culture around the world. Following World War II, the United Nations created the first international codification of human rights in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, followed by the passage of a series of human rights instruments, including the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and, most recently, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, which was established in 2006, and ratified by Canada in 2010. The central purpose of the CRPD is to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities, and to promote respect for their inherent dignity. It does this by reaffirming existing human rights and elaborating on them within the context of disability issues. Significantly for this discussion of financial supports for disabled people, Article 28 of the CRPD calls on states parties to recognize the right of persons with disabilities to an adequate standard of living for themselves and their families, including adequate food, clothing and housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. Indeed, it is this article that underpinned the recent UN's reprimand of Canada for failing to ensure that all disability entitlements, including those stemming from the Canada Disability Benefit Act, support an adequate standard of living and alleviate poverty for persons with disabilities, and for failing to streamline access to benefits across jurisdictions, to which I alluded in the introduction to this presentation. Yet, as Canadian disability rights advocates know all too well, the primary weakness of the rights-based model of disability supports is that codifications of disability rights, such as the CRDP, lack any substantive means of enforcement. Thus, even though Canada is a signatory to the CRDP, it continues to view it as an aspirational, non-binding document. As Smith Carrier points out, quote, "Despite touting itself as a beacon of human rights to the world, Canada has not embedded these laws domestically, They appear only as laudable ideals, lacking substantive legal application. End quote. This, by the way, is how we wound up with Track 2 made, despite the express condemnation of Bill C-7 by 3 UN human rights experts. Enduring enforcement challenges notwithstanding, a rights-based approach to disability supports demands a paradigm shift in which disabled people living in poverty are no longer objects of welfare and charity, but rights holders. Such a paradigm shift necessarily reveals the systemic ableism which underpins the enduring reticence of Canada and its provinces to enshrining the human rights for disabled people articulated by the CRPD into domestic laws. While this may accurately be described as cold comfort for disabled Canadians who are still being denied their rights, I believe that insofar as the CRPD can be used as a diagnostic tool to identify and expose the systemic ableism that remains endemic in this country, it nonetheless represents a huge advancement in the long struggle to enshrine a rights-based approach to disability supports into Canada's national and provincial laws. In order to demonstrate the urgent and ongoing need for advocacy for the nationwide adoption of a rights-based approach to disability supports, I want to spend the next few minutes looking at the Government of Alberta's decision to claw back the CDB from AISH recipients as income. On March 18, Alberta's Minister of Seniors, Community, and Social Services, Jason Nixon, gave the following report to the Standing Committee on Families and Communities regarding AISH and the CDB.
Preparing to meet the challenges facing Albertans tomorrow. Budget 2025 prioritizes the well-being of the most vulnerable, strengthens our communities, and builds a foundation for long-term prosperity. SCS's budget makes critical investments in programs that support vulnerable populations. Our government remains committed to supporting seniors, Albertans experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities, and vulnerable populations. We are working tirelessly to ensure Alberta's government is providing supports to those who need it most, when and where they need it, including affordable housing, employment supports, and continuing care. For Seniors, Community and Social Services, Budget 2025 invests $10.6 billion to protect and improve the supports for vulnerable Albertans. There is $833 million more than the 2024-2025 forecast, and more than $1 billion compared to Budget 2024, an increase of 10.6%. Budget 2025 includes nearly $1.26 billion for employment and income supports, an increase of $465 million for Budget 2024. That increase is primarily driven by caseload growth due to population growth, indexation of supports to inflation, and $38 million in anticipation of effects from U.S. tariffs. This funding also includes nearly $185 million in investment in career and employment services, which is an $89 million increase from Budget 2024. This will ensure Albertans looking for work have access to resources and tools to gain new skills to enhance their participation in the workforce. And it will empower Albertans with disabilities to pursue meaningful employment opportunities. Alberta is proud to have the best disability programs in Canada, and they're only going to get even better. Through Budget 2025, our government is investing $3.6 billion to support Albertans with disabilities. This is an increase of almost $152 million from 2024. One of our top priorities is connecting individuals and families with the greatest need to service as soon as possible. More specifically, Budget 2025 funding for persons with development disabilities, or PDD, program will increase by $83 million to $1.3 billion, so those with critical and urgent needs get the support that they need. The Family Support for Children with Disabilities, or FSCD budget, will also increase by $30 million to ensure those receiving services can continue to access critical supports and to continue making improvements to the program. Investments to support Albertans with disabilities include $1.64 billion allocated for the AISH program, which provides the highest core benefit rate amongst the provinces. Budget costs of AISH this year accounts for caseload growth, benefit rate increases of 2%, and the anticipated contributions from the federal government of $200 to the Canadian Disability Benefit coming into effect on July 2025. The new Canadian Disability Benefit will provide up to $200 per month for eligible Canadians with disabilities, and this benefit will be considered as non-exempt income for AISH recipients. This means that overall client income will remain the same. Again, I emphasize, AISH rates are not changing in this budget. AISH clients will remain well above the federal benchmark income of $1,814 per month that the feds encourage provinces to meet. For some perspective on that, with the AISH rate remaining at $1,901 per month, that is $554 higher than Manitoba, $533 higher than Ontario, $515 higher than Saskatchewan, and $417 higher than BC. In fact, I would say we strongly encourage other provinces to raise their rates to be equal to Alberta's ambition.
In my view, there are several elements of Minister Nixon's speech which clearly indicate that the Alberta government approaches the provision of disability supports from a charity model perspective. First of all, he lists disabled people among the vulnerable populations that the government is supporting. He emphasizes that, quote, "Our government remains committed to supporting seniors, Albertans experiencing homelessness, people with disabilities and vulnerable populations. We are working tirelessly to assure the Alberta government is providing support to those who need it most, when and where they need it." End quote. As per the charity model, Minister Nixon's consistent emphasis is on the government's efforts to support the most vulnerable, including people with disabilities. Likewise, in line with the charity model is that disabled people appear only as the objects of the government's tireless efforts to support them. Consequently, any mention, let alone consideration, of the role that systemic ableism has in making disabled people vulnerable remains entirely absent. While there is much in Minister Nixon's speech that is troubling from a disability rights and disability ethics perspective, the most jaw-dropping moment for disabled Albertans came when he made the following announcement, quote, "Investments to support Albertans with disabilities include $1.64 billion allocated for the AISH program, which provides the highest core benefit rate amongst the provinces. The cost of AISH this year accounts for caseload growth and benefit rate increases of 2% in the anticipated contributions from the federal government $200 to the Canadian Disability Benefit coming into effect in July 2025. The Canadian Disability Benefit will provide about $200 per month for eligible Canadians with disabilities. This benefit will be considered as non-exempt income for AISH recipients. This means that overall client income will remain the same. Again, I emphasize AISH rates are not changing in this budget. AISH clients will remain well above the federal benchmark income $1,804 per month that the feds encouraged provinces to meet. For some perspective on that, with the AISH remaining at $1,901 per month, that is $554 higher than Manitoba, $533 higher than Ontario, $515 higher than Saskatchewan, and $417 higher than BC. In fact, I would say we strongly encourage other provinces to raise their rates to be equal to Alberta's ambition. End quote. It is very easy for those unfamiliar with the CDB and its intended purpose to miss the shocking importance of what Minister Nixon is announcing here. According to the Canada Disability Benefit Act, the purposes of the CDB are to reduce poverty and to support the financial security of working-age persons with disabilities. In essence, therefore, what the Government of Alberta is doing by declaring that the CDB will be considered non-exempt income for AISH recipients is clawing back the $200 CDB from AISH recipients and thereby thwarting the explicit purpose of the CDB. I therefore contend that, ethically and morally, this act can only be classified as theft from disabled Albertans. For his part, however, Minister Nixon simply classifies the CDB as the federal government's contribution to AISH, implying that it is the province that is more in need of assistance than Albertans with disabilities. What's more, he ends his statement by reiterating his framing of his government as an exemplar among the provinces in terms of providing support for disabled people. thus seeking to circumvent any focus on the fact that he had just announced the government's clawback of the CDB from Albertans receiving AISH. Not surprisingly, over the course of the last 6 weeks since Minister Nixon made this announcement, much of the energies of disability rights advocates have been concentrated on fact-checking the Alberta government's clawback of the CDB. What follows is a line-by-line fact-check of the Alberta government's messaging on their clawback of the CDB. This fact-check was done by Don Slater, who moderates a Facebook group for AISH recipients. It is an accurate reflection of the view of Alberta's disability community. He begins with the very first phrase of the government's statement on their clawback of the CDB. The government of Alberta is proud. The fact check reads, "This is morally corrupt and tone deaf." To express pride while clawing back money from disabled Albertans, many of whom are living in poverty, is appalling. This statement drips with self-congratulation while ignoring the suffering of vulnerable people. It's akin to celebrating austerity as compassion. If your policies actively harm people who are already marginalized, then pride is not only misplaced, it's morally bankrupt. The government's statement further reads, "To retain the highest core benefits in the country for single individuals with a disability." The fact check reads, "Intellectually dishonest and misleading." Alberta's AISH program may appear to offer a higher core amount on paper, but this ignores critical context. Other provinces offer supplemental programs, for example, housing subsidies, transit support, pharmacare, that Alberta either does not provide or has allowed to degrade over time. Alberta also claws back other federal benefits, like the Canada Disability Benefit, meaning people often do not actually receive more. The use of core benefits is deliberately narrow, designed to cherry-pick statistics while ignoring total real-world support and quality of life. It's a sleight of hand to make the government appear generous while they erode the actual, practical supports disabled people depend on. Finally, the government's statement asserts regarding AISH, which exceeds the federal benchmark, combine old age security and guaranteed income supplement, that the provinces are encouraged to meet. The fact check reads, "Flat out falsehood and intentional misinterpretation." This is the most egregious part of the statement. The OAS and GIS are not intended as a benchmark for poverty level income. They are top-up programs for seniors who often have other income sources such as CPP, pensions, or savings. The federal government stated that the structure of the Canada Disability Benefit should be modeled after these programs, meaning it should top up other income, not replicate their dollar amount as a maximum. Interpreting a program structure as a benefit ceiling is either incompetence or deliberate manipulation. Either way, it betrays the policy's entire goal, to lift disabled people out of poverty, not redefine poverty as success. Thus contrasting the Alberta government's statement about their clawback of the CDB with the disabled community's fact-check response, it is clearly evident that the government's approach to providing financial support to disabled Albertans remains deeply rooted in the charity model, while disabled Albertans are calling for a rights-based approach to providing financial support. Significantly, the CDB itself is, at least ideologically, rooted in a rights-based approach. I, therefore, vigorously contend that the government of Alberta has violated both the spirit and the law of the CDB with its decision to, effectively, steal it from AISH recipients. I now want to briefly look at the new Alberta Disability Assistance Program, ADAP, which the government first announced about a month before its announcement of the CDB clawback. According to the government of Alberta, the purpose of the new ADAP is to empower Albertans with disabilities to pursue fulfilling job opportunities while continuing to receive the financial, medical and personal supports they need. It goes on to describe the genesis and operation of the program in the following terms, quote, Albertans with disabilities and the organizations that support them have made it clear that they want supports that meet their unique needs and abilities, rather than the current one-size-fits-all solution offered by the long-standing Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped (AISH) program. Albertans with disabilities stressed the importance of providing pathways to employment for individuals who are able to work but still need to receive benefits, and AISH is not designed to provide this type of support. ADAP was thoughtfully designed based on input from Albertans with disabilities to address a gap in supports for individuals with disabilities who are able to work and want to enjoy the benefits that come with employment, such as earning a paycheck, building relationships, developing skills, and providing a sense of purpose, belonging and independence. End quote. From this initial description of the program, it sounds as though ADAP actually aligns with a rights-based approach to providing supports for disabled people. It emphasizes that ADAP is designed to give Albertans with disabilities and the organizations that support them what they have long been asking for, namely, supports that meet their unique needs and abilities, rather than the current one-size-fits-all solution offered by the long-standing Assured Income for the Severely Handicapped (AISH) program, and pathways to employment for individuals who are able to work but still need to receive benefits, and AISH is not designed to provide this type of support. Based on this description, it sounds as though ADAP is indeed in line with a rights-based approach to disability supports. But then, we come to the How It Works section of the ADAP webpage, which reads, quote, "Starting in July 2026, the new Alberta Disability Assistance Program will become operational and disability income assistance applicants will be assessed for both the new program and AISH. Eligible applicants will be placed in the program best suited to their unique situation. If deemed eligible for AISH or ADAP, applicants will receive the difference in benefits retroactively to the date that their complete application was submitted. All existing AISH clients will be assured a place in either the new Alberta Disability Assistance Program or the AISH program. Those currently on AISH will continue to receive their existing benefits until they are able to be placed in the program best suited to their unique situation and can rest assured that their care and well-being will be prioritized as the new program is implemented." End quote. As with the Government of Alberta's messaging regarding its clawback of the CDB, the reality of what this will actually mean for disabled Albertans can easily be obscured by the sunshine and lollipops political rhetoric. So allow me to translate. Once ADAP is operational, all applications for disability support will be funneled into either ADAP or AISH. Of critical importance is that it is not disabled Albertans who will have the choice of applying for either AISH or ADAP. Rather, there will be a common application for both programs, and the government will place eligible applicants in the program best suited for their situation. What's more, existing AISH clients will be reassessed for possible transfer to ADAP. Alarmingly, there is absolutely no indication of what the criteria of these assessments and reassessments will be. The Alberta government apparently expects disabled Albertans to trust that the government will act in disabled people's best interests. The reality, however, is that disabled Albertans do not trust the provincial government to act in their best interests. I would argue, for good reason, especially considering this government's clawback of the CDB. In fact, news of the creation and implementation of ADAP is causing great anxiety among disabled Albertans who are currently on AISH. To give you a sense of how intense this anxiety is, I want to play for you a brief excerpt from a podcast that local journalist, Cam Tate, recently did on the subject of ADAP. In this excerpt, a woman named Sarah shares her concerns about ADAP. Content warning: Sarah uses some strong language to express herself.
Okay, now Tara. And a warning, there are some words which may not be suitable for younger audiences. Tara, welcome.
I have autism and ADHD. And Though I'm not on AISH, I do know what it's like to be on both sides of the fence. And I have many stories of what it's like to be on AISH and to get PDD. But on the another side, ADAPT isn't just going to affect those on AISH. What about those that they care about? Those people. I have many friends that are on AISH, whose disabilities vary from, well, visible to invisible like mine. And I can tell you right now that a lot of my friends have mental health issues for which their disabilities are full-time work. What this ADAPT is doing, not only are the rules arcane, but it's wrong on so many levels. There isn't a story or a post that I've seen on Facebook where people have started opting for MAID. I have one friend that's a social worker who lost 3 friends from unaliving themselves because of all this. And this absurd bullshit concerning ADAPT and the next 3 or 4 years while the UCP are in power of de-indexing or basically taking people off AISH and bringing AISH down, as in cutting AISH. There's a reason why those people are on AISH, and they're not using the system. The reality is that a lot of those people are there because jobs don't hire people with disabilities. I know because I am basically fully dependent on my husband, who is the only income in my household. I don't get AISH. All I get is my CPPD. If he gets sick or dies, I'm fucked. And I'm 50 years old. We got less than 15 years to look at till my retirement. What happens if he gets sick or dies? Where do I go to find help when there's no resources for me? Because supports don't support me in the way I need them. I am scared for my future. I'm scared for my friends. It's bad enough during COVID I had to help 2 of my friends not unaliving themselves. Meanwhile, trying to manage my own issues. And now I'm stuck in a fucking UCP nightmare again. Because Klein did the same thing to me all those years ago when they canceled and or cut resources to PDD funding, and as well as resources for programs to continue their stuff back in the 2000s. For every time I've turned around, it's always been a conservative that fucking ruined my life. And they're doing it again to so many people. No wonder how many funerals I'm going to have to go to where someone offed themselves just because they can't support themselves. How many of my friends are going to end up homeless? How many of my friends are going to kill themselves? How many of my friends are going to suffer? I'm already facing a threat of APP. When is it going to stop?
Tara clearly views the government's creation of ADAPT as an existential threat to people with disabilities, especially those with invisible disabilities, including herself. What I find most disturbing is that she is clearly worried that the government's actions in bringing in ADAPT would result in her friends with disabilities suffering and even dying by suicide, medically assisted or otherwise. Given the already existing body of evidence indicating that disabled people are indeed being driven to seek MAID because of poverty, Tara's concern is far from unfounded. I want to conclude this presentation with a brief sketch of what a disability ethics-informed, rights-based approach to disability supports in Alberta would look like. Along with this, I will issue a call to action for Albertans, particularly healthcare professionals and academics, to join the disabled community in calling on the Government of Alberta to immediately reverse its decision to claw back the CDB, and to redesign ADAP in order to bring it in line with the rights-based model. While financial supports for disabled people is not generally considered a bioethical issue, it does, as we have seen, directly impact health outcomes. Consequently, it is both reasonable and useful to apply a disability ethics lens to this issue. The two central tenets of disability ethics are to affirm the equal worth and worthiness of all human life regardless of the presence or absence of disability, and to ensure that the perspectives of disabled people are central in discussions and debates about ethical issues involving disability. Disability ethics thus shares the central theme of the disability rights movement: nothing about us without us. It is, therefore, the rights-based model of disability supports that aligns with a disability ethics approach insofar as it prioritizes the perspectives of disabled people on the basis of their status as fully human and full citizens. In contrast, the charity model is entirely incompatible with a disability ethics approach in that it casts disabled people, not as citizens with rights, but as vulnerable and dependent others. Our examination of the Government of Alberta's clawback of the CDB and its paternalistic approach to the implementation of ADAP clearly indicates its proclivity towards basing disability supports on the charity model rather than the rights-based model. Consequently, disabled Albertans are engaged in public education and advocacy activities aimed at trying to pressure the government to adopt a rights-based approach by reversing course on clawing back the CDB and redesigning ADAP to actually allow people to decide whether they want to be on ADAP or ASH. But the reality of systemic ableism means that the success of these advocacy efforts will depend on the extent to which non-disabled community members amplify these advocacy efforts. Hence, I leave you today with this call to action. Healthcare providers, academics, and ethicists need to become both informed and vocal about the systemic ableist oppression that the Government of Alberta is inflicting on disabled Albertans through its continued use of the charity model as the basis for providing disability supports. It is no overstatement to say that, unless we see a wholesale shift to a rights-based model, the well-being, and, indeed, the lives, of thousands of disabled Albertans will be placed in grave jeopardy.